after seeing and getting all the announcements, PlayStation 4, I thought I'd bring by two friends and colleagues who I've known for a very long time. Chris Morris, now with Variety, CNN Money, many things in the past. How are you doing?
Very good. Thanks for having me.
And from back all the way to the GameSpot TV days, Giant Bomb's one and only Jeff Gerstmann.
That's right. We're going to get in front of that boxing ring one more
Exactly.
time here. I tried to get them to build it for you, but they're like, no, we're going to PlayStation 4. Like, all right, fine.
Because nothing says video games like a boxing ring. So it's all over. PS4 is announced just as we had anticipated. It was an interesting event. I think just in tone, it was a little more formal and buttoned up than, say, the cheerleading that you get out of an E3 press conference.
Yeah, it was. I call it a solid triple. I think that it was not an out-of-the-park home run on Sony's part, but they set a pretty good bar for Microsoft to have to clear when they finally come out with Durango's announcement.
Now, Jeff, I mean, in terms of how they were able to make the case for the PlayStation 4, who do you think they were talking to? Was this for the gamer? Was this for the analyst? Was this for the international press?
I think it's all of the above. I think, everyone's gotten a little skeptical of Sony. I mean, the Vita is not doing well at all. The PlayStation 3 had plenty of issues. Just pick one. And so a lot of this felt like it was tailored to say, like, hey, we understand. We fixed that stuff. So, developers who aren't invited to this thing get to watch that and go, oh, man, we should totally make games for that thing. And, then the press gets to see it and go like, oh, they're showing way more than they would normally would at an initial reveal. And then the fans at home, I think, get a much clearer picture of what that system will be, hopefully. I mean, it could all be smoke and mirrors. It could all be fake. Who knows? But start to think like, oh, well, what am I going to get in November? What's going to happen?
I think also that one of the strongest things that came out of this was Mark Cerny, a man I greatly admire, talking about sort of what is the philosophy behind the architecture. It was probably the sharpest contrast to the Ken Kutaragi era, especially the cell processor, which was just strength and sort of the ultimate way to do things. This was, we're trying to be friendly and accessible, and we're going to have the big group hug of developers.
Right. It was fascinating that they came out and basically said the cell didn't work like we wanted it to. It was too hard to develop for. We're going back to a PC-based architecture, and hopefully that's going to make it easier for developers to make games for this system and give it a wide spectrum of titles to choose from.
I mean, was that something that you were expecting that Sony would, I guess without being explicit, quite implicitly said, yeah, we really alienated third parties especially?
Well, I mean, it's been the uphill struggle for them, right? I mean, trying to win these third parties back. That's why I say, like, developers watching probably got a thrill out of it. And it was one of their own up there. It was Mark Cerny, a guy that is very well respected up there, saying like, hey, we got 8 gigs of RAM, and like that's a big deal. And also just like touching on tons of little things that you hear it and you go like, oh, I can't believe they're talking about this, like controller latency, just these little pet peeve issues across the internet and across developers that they're just like they're really paying attention to, at least at a level where they feel that they need to announce it alongside the initial announcement of the system. I think that says a lot about where their head's at in terms of trying to turn these relationships around.
Let's talk about that controller. We had gotten wind of the fact that we were going to see something different. Has a touchpad on the front. It does obviously have motion. They didn't use the word 6-axis. Awesome that they didn't. But there is sort of another motion bar. I mean, are they covering the bases, or do you think that there's a little bit more thought that we're going to see some games that really utilize that down the line?
It seemed like kind of like a kitchen sink approach to me. They threw everything they could think of to throw on there. They've had some experience with the touch screen thanks to Vita. It really hasn't been used super well there yet, but developers are starting to get used to it. They can do some things with it, and it also gives them the excuse to get some casual games on there if they're trying to pull in the moms and the sisters and the kids in the family, for the people who aren't going to play those core games that they bring out for PlayStation most of the time.
I mean, you've held a PlayStation controller probably since you're that high.
Yeah.
Do you think this is is this a big change? Is this going to be alienating some of the diehard PlayStation fans?
No, I don't think it'll alienate anyone. I think the D-pad looks a little different from. I mean, they've kept that D-pad forever, but if that could go good, could go bad. I'm curious about the tightness of the analog sticks. The DualShock 3 pretty loose compared to the Xbox.
Yes.
Like I wonder if they'll tighten it up a little bit. The feel of the triggers, it looks like they're definitely changing that. And it does have motion in it. In Drive Club, you will be able to turn to steer. So they're not calling it 6-axis, but it's still there.
Maybe it's more than 6. It's 8-axis. That's what we're looking at here.
Still talking like that.
So let's talk a little bit about the games. This, for me, is where I felt it started to kind of slow down, that there wasn't anything that was kind of surprising, nor did it take advantage of all this interesting cloud stuff that David Perry was talking about.
Well, David Perry came out and made a lot of really cool promises, but the problem was, the subtext was, we're going to do something great someday. We're going to do this thing someday. And it kind of confused me as sitting in the audience, just because it just... these all sound fantastic features, but we've all heard great features from Sony that never quite made it into the final product. And the problem, I think, with the games is we had a lot of things that looked like they could be really climatic moments, like Blizzard walking up there, and all of a sudden, oh, it's Diablo 3. It's the game that I finished a year and a half ago. Oh, Destiny. Yeah, we all kind of figured that was coming anyways. So they didn't really have one that was an out of the park, to use that phrase again, but I think they're saving that ammunition for E3.
I mean, I think it is one of the tougher things. They have to save some stuff for E3 so they can keep the message going, but they also need to give us something. I don't know if they found exactly where the happy medium was there.
Yeah, I think that they're probably going to save a few things. I mean, you know, they have to keep something in mind for when Microsoft finally starts talking. They need to have something to counter that, whether it's, you know, post-GDC, pre-E3, well, I guess that's the same thing, right? Somewhere in that timeline of kind of hitting back if Microsoft comes out and does something that scares them.
Now, on the subject of the cloud, I mean, it was, once again, it was great ideas, but it was funny to go from something so specific as to the specs of the system to really high-minded, wonderful-sounding ideas with no clear idea how they're going to be implemented.
And I actually kind of like that, because I don't believe that stuff works. You know, if you look at OnLive and that sort of stuff, like it just never has fully replicated the feel of running software locally. And I think that all those ideas are really fascinating, but they're probably smart to not go too firm on that, because it's a lot of really crazy stuff that might not work, or if it does work, is going to require very specific, you know, bandwidth situations for both players and that sort of thing. I mean, when they talk about, you know, your friend can come in and control the game for a little while, like that's amazing. It's like they're already taking kind of the Miiverse concepts to a further extreme. But is that going to work if someone's on like DSL in the middle of nowhere, or satellite internet or something like that? I mean, there are a lot of concerns with that. So they're probably smart to not like go too firm in the sand there and say like, this will be for everybody and it'll be terrific. That they would just disappoint, guaranteed, if they did that.
But I guess my only concern is if you take that cloud stuff out of the equation, which really I agree has the biggest question mark over whether it can be done, then does that make the PS4 a PS3 with much prettier games?
Yeah, that's the biggest issue they're facing right now. I think it's part of the reason we didn't hear about pricing tonight, is whatever this is going to be, you got to remember the PlayStation 3 is still priced pretty high for this stage of the life cycle. So even if they bring PlayStation 3 down to, I don't know, $150, let's say, for a round figure, if you've got a $299 or $399 console, you know, for the consumer who's trying to decide whether they're going to buy one, they have to see what's the big draw. What am I going to get from the PS4 I don't get from the PS3? And what we saw tonight, there doesn't seem to be a whole bunch that's really standing out about the PS4 yet.
Yeah, so I mean, without the cloud, how would you define what the PS4 is?
Well, I think it's a smart twist on what they've been doing with consoles. I mean, if you look at the last generation, it was defined by social happening in the middle of everything. So it was a lot of features cobbled on, a lot of things just thrown in because it's like, oh, we think we can do this, Facebook sharing, I don't know. This was just developed from the ground up with that stuff in mind, and I think they can benefit a lot from that. I don't know that that's necessarily a key selling point, but I think what they're showing and what they're talking about, assuming that there are more games in the pipe that will be ready for launch and all that, I think they'll have enough to get the base going. The base consumers will be like, yeah, let's go get the next Sony platform at this whatever high price it ends up being, and that'll take them to the first price cut, I think.
So, of course, we just learned about the PS4, which means we can't just talk about the PS4. Microsoft is going to have to respond. They might be waiting, or maybe they're going to act a little bit earlier. When do you think that they're going to finally sort of pull back the sheet on what they have called Durango?
Yeah, I go back and forth on this. You know, Microsoft was the first group to actually come out and do a special event for their console, but I keep going back to E3. It makes sense. What I think they're probably going to do is they're going to selectively leak information up until E3, so we're getting that stream, a trickle of information, and then when E3 comes, they can blow us away with the games themselves.
What do you think, Jeff?
I think this event was good enough that Microsoft has to react a little sooner than that, so I could see like a late April time frame.
Yeah, I'm starting to think the same thing too. I think no later. It probably is going to have to be late April. All right, Jeff Gerstmann, Chris Morris, guys, thank you so much for your time. I have a feeling we may be doing this very soon in the future, like late April.